Hello everybody, it's Mxiety. I am on tonight with Duff the Psych. Do you prefer Dr. Duff? Do you prefer Duff the Psych? Do you prefer just Duff? What's happening?
I'm the worst at that. I always say, well, you can call me whatever you want. And people are going, well, I have anxiety, so I don't like not knowing. So Robert's cool. Duff is cool. You don't need to call me Dr. Duff or anything like that.
Okay, got it. Got it. Well, welcome to the community. Welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us tonight. I am super excited to have you on.
Thanks.
And so I just finished reading your book because you posted it to be. Is it still free on Kindle?
No, it's not. It was free for like 3 or 4 days, and then my other one was free for 3 or 4 days, and now they're both back to normal. But they're cheap. It's like $2.99 or $3.99, something like that on Kindle. So
they're and what are the books called? Just so everybody knows.
Is this a bad language stream or no?
Hold on. I'm gonna make it one. I can turn that on. We're gonna go from.
We don't have to. I can censor if need be. I'm used to that.
All right, you are good to fucking go. Go for it.
Yeah. So my books there. I have the hardcore self-help series. That's like the umbrella series, and I have 2 books. First one is Fuck Anxiety. Second one is Fuck Depression. So that's what they are.
That's awesome.
Did you read the anxiety one?
Yes, I read the anxiety one. I didn't get to the depression one just because I did know it existed, but okay, I don't have excuses. I just physically didn't have time. But
it's all good. I'll send you one.
Oh my gosh. The anxiety one was awesome. I loved the language. I loved how frank it was. I loved just like the very, very natural approach. And that's obviously not typical for a therapist, especially therapists that you see online. I feel like it's very like buttoned up, and they're trying to preserve that sense of academia, I guess, but
it's kind of clinical.
Yeah, it's very, very clinical. So what made you not do that?
Well, so it's kind of funny, like my life, like my professional life, it's kind of has like 2, like the Venn diagram. It's got like 2 like non-concentric circles. There's a little bit of overlap, but the funny thing is, like during my day job, like throughout the week, I'm doing something very, very, very different from the fuck blah 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 books, which is neuropsychology. So I work with older people. Like I work with older adults, testing them for dementia and brain injuries and strokes and things like that.
Okay.
So very different from, like, certainly none of my colleagues have books like mine out.
Got it.
But I guess the question was like how I kind of arrived at this and why I do it this way. So like I've always been kind of like a pain in the ass for teachers and stuff. Like I've always been a little bit like more casual and a little bit rebellious and things like that, kind of going through school. And so I went through undergrad for psychology, and then immediately after that I went into a PhD program.
Okay.
So you get your master's sort of in the mix. It's
Okay.
like a 5-year program. And in my program, even there, I felt like a little bit different from other people. I had different sort of interests. Like I really put a high value on being like a real person, not just having everything be related to like the study, the academia, the research, all of that. That's important. But like, it's also important to like, do some gaming and like go out and hang out with your friends.
Be a person.
And kind of, be a person, especially if you're planning on working with like people, it's really hard to be empathetic if you can't empathize with what it's like to be a real person, so that's kind of always been sort of in the back of my mind, and I could never turn that off. It would leak into what I do. Like I remember I did it was for my like master's project, capstone project. It was something having to do with like whether like matching in personality between a therapist and a client matters.
Okay.
And the results of that are irrelevant, but I remember doing my presentation for it for like the whole group, my cohort, and my like professor being like, well, yeah, your results are good. At some point you might need to kind of like make things a little bit more professional, because I had like little jokes and like funny things like in the presentation.
Oh, you joked. How dare.
Yeah, I know. So that's always been a thing, and then so you go through a PhD program, and in psychology, the way it works, or clinical psychology, the way it works is you do, it's a little bit variable in terms of how long it is, but like if you're getting out as soon as you quickly can, which is what my goal was, it's a 5-year program. And so you do 4 years basically on campus, and then the 5th year is an internship. they call that the like pre-doctoral internship. And so the way it worked for me is I was living with my wife at the time. We were like high school sweethearts. I've known her since I was 15. I followed her to college. Immediately after college, it's like, okay, graduate, get married, move in together, start grad school, you know? And she put a lot of like what she had going on sort of in the back burner because she had wanted to be a lawyer. She's gone through a lot of different iterations. She's not a lawyer now, but she like took the LSAT, got into law school and all of that, but kind of put that on the back burner so that I could pursue what I was doing. So she was kind of just working at the time and I was going to school. And then for the pre-doctoral internship, we moved down to San Diego in Southern California, which wasn't like, we were already in Southern California, but it was far enough away that we were away from like our normal, like most of our family, our support structures and stuff like that. And the way that the internships work is you basically work full-time as a psychologist, but you get paid a very small fraction of the amount. And so you kind of get overworked and underpaid. And awesome. I was in like, I was in a busy healthcare setting too, you know, so I was just like slammed with stuff. And it became a period of time that was really hard for us. So my wife's name is Joelle. She was having a hard time with her anxiety. So she has anxiety. She also has bipolar too, that we found out at the time. And we were living in this like tiny little 1-bedroom apartment with no natural light in it, to the point where if you didn't go outside, you couldn't really tell if it was day or night. It was just like always dark. It's like a little cave.
Okay.
Literally my office was a desk shoved into our like walk-in closet in our 1-bedroom apartment. And so I would close the door when I would be working or playing games or whatever. So like I would be like in your position, like streaming League of Legends after coming home from internship, like 10 feet away from her with the door closed to the walk-in closet, you know?
Oh my God. I mean, so, wait. But that's just, to me, that is like that streamer mentality of like, always be streaming no matter what. The sacrifices you made for your own health, streaming out of the closet. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, I literally did, like, for, you know, after you do the pre-doctoral internship, you have to do another one. So another year of like postdoctoral internship. And I literally did some interviews I called it the closet office, where I like in the periphery, I'm pretty sure you can see like hanging shirts, you know, so there's like a white door behind me and shirts, and I'm interviewing for like a, you know, postdoctoral position. So, I mean, all that is to say, like things like kind of progressively got really tough at that point. Sure. And Joelle actually ended up getting hospitalized. So she was hospitalized for thoughts of suicide. You know, she at the time was taking Xanax and was taking kind of progressively more of it. And there was an appointment that we went to it was like a emergency appointment with a psychiatrist. And they asked the question, you know, have you thought about harming yourself? And instead of saying yes or no, she started crying, you know, and that was sort of like the indicator that
something,
okay,
we're not right.
We're there, you know? And, so we worked out, you know, it was basically a voluntary hospitalization. It was the right thing to do at the time. But it was really hard for her. You know, she's a wedding planner by trade, actually. You know, that's what she ended up doing. And at the time she had weddings still going on.
Yeah.
You know, that was part of it too. Like there was not a long string, but a string of really, really difficult clients. As you can imagine, sometimes with weddings that does happen, you know? And so, you know, we're isolated. I'm not present because I'm just wrapped up in the work that I'm doing. She's got a string of difficult clients that are telling her that, you know, she shouldn't be doing this, she's worthless, all that kind of thing. And so naturally that's going to get to you, right? So the hospitalization process was, you know, it is what it was. It was better than it could be because it was voluntary, but she did still stay for like 72 hours, you know. And after she came back, naturally we do have a good relationship, you know, we talk a lot and communicate a lot, and so we talked a lot about like how things came to be here, you know, like in this juncture of our lives, like we're both smart, you know, people, we're both very capable, certainly she is. On paper it's like this shouldn't be right, we don't really have that kind of control, but it shouldn't be happening, you know. So we basically talked a lot about that. And you know, I realized that a lot of the resources that she was given or people that she's worked with were what you were talking about, very, very unapproachable, right? There's a very popular workbook for anxiety, and it's a great workbook, but it's one of the most common ones, but it's about this thick, right? And you read through it.
And I've showed it, and I've like recommended it to people several times as a go-to. So yeah,
it's great, but if you're in a position where your anxiety is already heightened and it's
Oh,
hard
it did
to
nothing
focus
for
on
me
anything,
while I was anxious. Yeah.
correct, right?
Yeah.
So there's no way you're going to read through what's essentially, you know, a textbook broken up into sections that are
Yeah.
kind of more digestible if you're already elevated like that, you
Right.
know. And there was kind of one particular talk where I picked up this book and I'm like reading something about misattribution of interoceptive cues or something like that, and I'm like, what the fuck are they trying to say? You know, like I'm about to get my PhD in this and I can barely understand and chew through the language here. So of course people all over the place are in the same boat, you know. And so I kind of realized in that moment that a lot of the content that psychologists and therapists put out is really like, we strive to be empathetic, right? Meaning like being able to kind of put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, but we don't show that through the content that we make because we don't consider what it's actually like to be in that frame of mind. Being super depressed and having no motivation to read something, or
Right.
being super anxious and having like your brain just fried trying to be a normal person, right? So, you know, I was kind of, we were talking about this and I was like, man, just like, this sucks, you know, like fuck anxiety. Like, you know, when they say this, what they're trying to say is that your brain is basically being an asshole and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, well, maybe you should do that. Maybe you should make that resource. Maybe you should write that book, you know, maybe you should write that, call it Fuck Anxiety. I'm like, that's a good idea, you know. And within like a month it was released on Kindle. So I kind of took every spare moment and started writing it, like, you know, in the office, in bed on the iPad during my breaks on internship, and cranked it out because the fire was there, having gone through you know what we just went through. And that's where it started, you know. And so people started picking it up and getting some, I got some feedback about it, and it just sort of continued to snowball from there.
That's awesome. That's incredible. So
Thanks.
you've gotten feedback that like this approach really helps people versus not just using like doctoral language, but versus somebody like, for example, going back to the anxiety workbook, I just honestly felt the scenarios and everything that it was giving me were inducing more anxiety. I was like, this is making me anxious, because anything when you're anxious makes you anxious.
Yeah.
So is it something about, like, have you gotten feedback that the language is particularly what makes it so graspable, or do you think it's just like your approach and being so frank, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the humor part of it is important, you know. Like I don't want to make it into something trivial. I don't want to make it something funny. But like, you know, when you're in it, like, you can recognize that some things are funny about it, and it's good to laugh about this while you're trying to do something about it. And so tempering this stuff, you know, I'm giving legitimate techniques from, a lot of it's from CBT, so from cognitive behavioral therapy, or some other approaches too. But tempering it with that sort of humor, so that, you know, if we're talking about a scenario that strikes a chord with you, like, you know, talking about trying to stop avoiding things and feeding your anxiety with that avoidance, that's a tough subject. But doing it in a way that's kind of based on a funny scenario helps you to kind of like get one foot in the door, and at least is entertaining enough to keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's in line with like feedback that you've gotten, like people. People responding.
Well, I get both. I get both.
Oh.
I get, you know, 1-stars that are like, don't waste your time. This is the shortest, stupidest book ever. I could have just read a BuzzFeed article about it. Or how unprofessional is it to say these words? This person is a terrible, you know, human. And people like,
should not have keyboards. There's just some people who don't need keyboards.
I mean, there's also like, I mean, the part that cracks me up is like, I've gone through several. I'm looking up because I have posters of the book covers up here, so that's why I keep looking up.
Oh,
but like, I've had several versions of the book cover, but it always has, you know, it's bleeped out, but it says "fuck anxiety" on it. So when someone gets the book and it's like, I'm surprised that the language was like this, I'm like, okay.
Right.
Like it's kind of apparent.
When I bought it on Kindle, it wasn't named Bleep Anxiety.
Yeah.
Or even if it was, that's not, I don't understand. I wonder if the same, I'm sure you've also heard of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Yeah. So I wonder if he gets similar crap to that.
Oh yeah, I know that. I mean, there's quite a few of these books now. Like mine was pretty early on. It was in 2014 2014, I think, or 2015. I can't even remember. It was pretty early on, and there was maybe one or two at the time. But since then, I mean, you go on Amazon, it's just like the first like 2 pages are all like fuck this, fuck that, you know. So I'm like, I'm not sure if I'll actually ever write another book like this, because I feel like the wave is kind of cresting, you know, like it's. But I feel like there's kind of been a little bit of a movement with you know, my books and other books that are similar. Certainly there's a lot of others that are more popular than mine, but like to sort of infuse a bit of like the human element and the humor and stuff like that into the self-help genre and into the mental health genre, so that we like don't necessarily have to call it, you know, fuck whatever. We could just write a book and it's kind of understood that there might be humorous elements or things that are not just pure cut and dry and boring and stuff like that. So I think that hopefully this is moving things, you know, kind of in the right direction.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. Yeah. I was wondering then, do you feel, because this conversation kind of came up recently on streamer Twitter, where, you know, that bubble of Twitter that I am placed into.
Sure.
Of you might miss out on some opportunities if you do XYZ, right? So if you're a girl that has an account where you post, you know, nude photos, if you cuss a lot, if you blank, you know, insert blank, you might miss out on an opportunity or a sponsorship or something like that. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like there's some truth to that, but you're also, the way I would think of it is not missing out on opportunities. You're kind of screening out opportunities. You know, if something's not going to be a good fit for you, it's not going to be a good fit for you. And if you're being authentic in whatever that thing is that you're doing that you feel sort of like risky about, you're being your authentic self. And if something doesn't fit with that, that's a sign. Like maybe you shouldn't be doing like that thing. You shouldn't be working with that sponsor or attending that event or whatever it is. You know, there are things that are like the one random example is that like my books, I cannot advertise. Like I can't advertise them on Facebook or on like Amazon platforms, because they don't like swear words. They don't like even bleeped out. So I have not been able to put any money into directly advertising them. But at the same time, the name really communicates what the books are all about. And so that's like kind of almost in a more viral sense, the people who are attracted to it have been attracted to it. So I've kind of screened out a lot of people that aren't and brought in people that are, because they're going to naturally find it in that sort of way.
Okay.
You know, so I think, you know, thinking of it more as being authentic and then screening out what might not be a good fit is maybe a good reframe for that sort of fear of missing out on things.
Got it. Okay, but what about the fact that I need to be likable all the time? Like, this is definitely a personality trait that I have, that like everybody needs to like me. What do you help me?
Do you like everybody else all the time? Like, do you like every single person on this earth?
I do genuinely try to like people and give them as many chances as I can. I like that I'm watching. So if you see my eyes darting, it's because I'm darting to chat. Yeah. And just one of my nope.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I would back up, right? Because you're saying I want everybody to like me. Behind that is the assumption that's buried within there that there are people who don't like you. But a lot of these pictures that you're probably running through your brain are not totally clear. They're probably situations where they're a bit ambiguous, and you're making the assumption that somebody doesn't like you.
Sure.
Or you're reading, you know, you're kind of doing a bit of mind reading, saying like, okay, when they say this sentence online with zero punctuation and no expression, I'm going to interpret it as them thinking I'm a bad person, because internally I kind of also think that I'm a bad person. So you're kind of cherry picking out evidence that supports sort of that like internal sense you already have about yourself, you know? So I would not assume that that's even the truth in the first place, you know, without figuring it out, you know, and if you figure out that there are some people who like legitimately don't like you because of who you are, then again, they're not good fits for your life, right? Those people that give me those 1-star reviews because they can't stand anything about my personality, fine, you know, that's not ever going to work. No, of course, you know, and there's naturally going to be people that, you know, for anybody that those, they just don't mix, you know, they don't work well together for a variety of reasons. But you do need to take a step back. I mean, that's one thing that anxiety like 100% does to you, is it sort of like it convinces you that it's keeping you safe from something, right? Like
Right.
you invent a scenario in your
Right.
head, like, okay, well, if I call this person after I forgot to call them yesterday, then they're going to know that I am not a responsible person, and whatever. You may wrap the scenario up in your head, and anxiety goes, whoa, 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 hey, listen, I got this. How about you don't call that person and instead get super elevated just in case they burst through the door and try to kill you, right? And then so you don't call the person back, and then anxiety says, see, I kept you safe. That was a terrible thing that could have happened.
Right.
It didn't happen. And so now feed me a cookie, make me bigger, you know?
Right.
So that process of avoidance keeps making the anxiety bigger and bigger. But like, if you circle it all the way back, you're like, wait, that was like a hypothesis. That was something I wasn't sure was true. That was something I probably kind of just like spun in my head in the first place. So there was nothing to be saved from in the first place. So yeah, anxiety does that a lot. It does that a lot. I think one of the things is basically just trying to wrap your head around the fact that that is a common occurrence, like that does happen a lot. And, you know, getting to know some of like the more common, I call them thinking traps. People call them all kinds of things.
Hold on. There's a fancy word for them that I definitely know in CBT. Okay. And I don't know the word now. I don't remember. Do you even remember the fancy words, or are you just like, no, I just call them what they are?
So do you know what the first word in CBT is? Like, what's the first like term in that? So CBT stands for what?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay. So take the first word, cognitive, right? So that's like, that involves your thinking. So the way that you think about things.
Right.
And when you kind of self-sabotage or you jump to conclusions, it's kind of a distorted way of thinking, right?
Sure.
So they're called cognitive distortions.
Distortions! Okay, yeah. No, I totally knew it and remembered it before you said anything. So
yeah. You got there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so like cognitive distortions are probably the more common way of talking about them in like other, you know, literature and stuff. I tend to call them thinking traps, but you can call them any number of things. But there's some common patterns, common things that we do, you know, personalizing, taking things personally, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralizing, trying to read people's minds, emotional reasoning. There's a whole slew of them. I certainly have resources about those, you know, but recognizing what some of the common ones are can help you sort of pick them out, and when they happen around you or to you. And the more you can kind of train yourself to your attention, and please stop me if I'm rambling. I mean,
I don't think you can ramble, because this is literally what the show is about. So if you're rambling, then I don't know why I'm here. So
okay.
Go on.
All right, I'll jump back on then. So your attention, right? Your think of your attention as sort of like a flashlight. You know, you put that flashlight on.
I have ADHD, things. So it's shorter than that.
So it's not shorter. That means that your operator isn't always the best at pointing it at the right thing.
Right.
That spotlight's still intense.
Right.
But the spotlight operator is like, oh, hey, that's pretty cool over there. Oh, hey, that's pretty cool over there. Still really strong attention, just not pointing in the right place, at least all the time, you know? But as somebody with anxiety, your sort of spotlight of attention is always going to be trained to quickly find the things that support the negative ways that you already feel, right? And we call that like mental filtering. You filter out the stuff that's either neutral or positive. You pull out all the stuff that supports those negative thoughts you already have. And so by paying attention and learning some of these traps and really making an effort to, like, even on paper, write them out and notice them, you can sort of subtly over time retrain that attention to be, you know, less biased toward those things and notice some of the other evidence as well, not just the stuff that already supports your sort of negative assumptions.
Right. So what is there an end game for cognitive behavioral therapy in terms of, like, is it like, you know, like taking a college course where you have to learn X amount of information, and once you learn it, like, this is it, and then it's a matter of implementing this information in the real world, which most majors you never get to do, but besides the point. But so is it like that, or is cognitive behavioral therapy kind of like yoga, where it's like it's a path for the rest of your life where you discover parts of it? Like, how?
A little bit of both, you know. I mean, you also have to keep in mind that, like, there's different issues, right?
Sure.
Somebody doing CBT or any other type of therapy for like a specific phobia, right? So say a phobia of driving or dogs or something like that, it's gonna be very different from somebody that has just rampant generalized anxiety. Right. You can essentially cure a phobia. You know, you can get somebody driving without significant anxiety. You can get somebody to own a dog and love their dog and not have anxiety when interacting with it if they have a phobia. it's a little bit different when you're dealing with somebody who it's kind of maybe a little bit more generalized or something like that. And so in those cases, to me, I don't want to call it an end game. It's kind of a guiding light. It's a goal, you know, and people feel differently about it. But the way that I see it is like the goal is to like take some control back from anxiety.
Okay.
Right? So like what anxiety tries to do, I talked to you kind of about this already a little bit about trying to make you avoid things and such. But anxiety is basically trying to drive your boat, right? It's trying to tell you where to go and what to do with your behavior.
Right.
You know, something happens, you think about it a certain way, that makes you feel a certain way, and that's going to influence what you do about that, how you behave, how you act. And unfortunately, that piece in the middle where anxiety has a lot of influence, that's going to inevitably cause you to act a lot of different ways. And so the goal of CBT is really to kind of put a buffer there where you can pay attention to what's happening, what that process is, but you make the choice about how you act based on that. You're not sort of compelled to do things because of anxiety or not do things because of anxiety, right? So you're more in control. And basically, I like to tell people that you're trying to get better at being an anxious person. And a happy byproduct of that is that you might feel less anxiety. You know, you might feel less anxiety when you're more confident in being an anxious person. But that goal isn't to get rid of all the anxiety. It's to take control back.
So it's kind of like retraining anxiety to do its evolutionary purpose, which is like, I need you to protect me, but not when there's not an actual threat kind of thing, like retraining.
Sure. I mean, it's one influence among many, right? Whenever something happens or you're considering something, there's going to be a lot of competing influences. Anxiety can have a really, really big voice, but there are other things as well. You know, you have logic. We have these huge frontal lobes as humans, so we have the ability to kind of think through scenarios. Sometimes that gets us into trouble with anxiety when we think through too many of them. But like we have logic, we have kind of more deep-seated feelings. All these things kind of are in the mix. And so we want to just sort of even the playing field a little bit and maybe even put anxiety in the backseat, saying like, hey, I hear the signal that you're trying to give me, and I'll consider that among the other things that I'm also getting input about. And I'm going to decide what to do about that. But I need to, you need to give yourself enough sort of mental space to make that decision. And some of the tips and tricks and things that you do in therapy or through self-help is basically just trying to give you some of that space so that you can make that decision for yourself.
Got it. How many years have you been doing this now?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like all my life, but like, I mean, I graduated in, what would it have been? I mean, it would have been 2014, I suppose. So not that long, I guess 5 years.
Okay.
I've only been licensed as a psychologist for 2 years. There's a whole thing that, I mean, you got to go through, your 5+ years of grad school, your 2 internships, and then you got to make sure you accumulate enough hours. Then you take 2 really, really, really hard tests, and it takes time to prepare for those. Then once you pass those, then you're allowed to apply to be a psychologist, So there's a lot that goes into licensure, but, so I've been licensed for 2 years, but I've been practicing and doing this for longer than that.
Got it. And the difference is, like you being able to accept money for it, or because there's a lot of armchair psychologists going around, especially around mental health Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. So like, what is the difference between finally, like, I study psychology and get a bachelor's degree in it, and then I start practicing and like talking to people and accepting money in exchange for it?
Yeah. So like a psychologist, the term means somebody with a doctoral level degree in psychology.
Okay.
So PhD, PsyD, something like that. They may or may not practice therapy. Some psychologists just teach. Some psychologists just teach. Some do research. Some do all of the above. I do a little bit of all of the above. Not much research, but everything else. When you get licensed as a psychologist, though, that is specifically for doing direct clinical work. So doing therapy or doing testing or something like that. Before you get licensed, you're not legally allowed to do those things independently. You would have to do them under somebody else's license, much like a physician's assistant and a doctor, right? So you'd be operating under someone else's license, which I did for numerous years as like a psych assistant.
Got it.
There are a variety of other levels of education. There's a lot of master's level educations that you can also provide therapy. Mm-hmm. So marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, there's a variety of them. Same thing though, until they get licensed, they're not legally allowed to provide these services independently. So they can get their degree, but they still have to go through the process of taking the test and getting licensed.
Yeah.
One thing that's I have mixed feelings about it. Some people do it well. a lot of people do not, is they say, okay, well, I'm not acting as a psychologist or a therapist, I'm acting as a life coach. I just happen to have the degree of XYZ.
That's a big word for us, life coach, because that's
doesn't mean a goddamn thing.
No, it doesn't. It's just I just had a conversation about this with several psychologists in a room, and they were talking about the fact that not just behind the fact that you don't really need any licensure to be a life coach, but just the fact
you can make up your own.
You can. The fact that you can. People are okay with accepting, like, that's where the charlatans are, but people are, I'm sure there are good life coaches out there. I'm sorry. And I know there's a lot of licensed therapists who are life coaches.
Right,
so that's a little,
and I know some people that have, like, I have a good friend who, she has her PhD in psychology, but she didn't want to go through the process of being licensed. And it is kind of a racket. I mean, there are some factors that, like, it's not really fair. Like, it costs a lot of money.
It does,
it's unapproachable a lot of times. And if you fail a test, like my like law and ethics test, the first time I was like 2 points off of passing it. So I had to take it again, and there are certainly some kind of institutional barriers. And when you take into account, socioeconomic stats and all those things, I can see why a lot of people wouldn't want to sort of like play that game.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have some friends who have PhDs, but have decided to not do that. But they work with, even like, one of my friends worked with celebrities and things like that, but not as a psychologist, more as like a coach and advisor. And so there are some people that can do it well, but the thing is, it's sort of unregulated. You don't have the same law and like ethical standards and things like that that are applied to it. So the field is very open. It's like having I would say it's like the field of supplements, right? Supplements are unregulated.
Yeah.
So you can have stuff that's complete bullshit, and you can have a few things that are really good.
That's exactly what somebody in chat said. It's life coach is the human analog to dietary supplements. And
beautiful. I like that.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's really nailing it, I think.
Yeah. So there are, and the thing is with, life coaches, or you can invent terms, right? So like therapist, like psychologist are protected terms, but you can tweak that. You can say like, relational intervention special therapist or whatever, and you can make up your own little school online. You can make a Teachable account and have an online course and a certificate, and suddenly like, hey, I have a certificate from the Duff and Stuff relational intervention specialist.
Duff and Stuff. You have this brand, right? Like, this brand is yours somewhere? No?
It will be.
It should be.
But it doesn't mean anything, is the point. It's not like an officially regulated thing. Just, it's kind of like I bartended while I was in grad school, and bartending licenses are the same way. There's actually no such thing as a bartender's license. There's just schools independently that give you a certificate called a bartender's license. So it's like, it's kind of the same thing.
There's not a bartenders association where you have to pass the bar? No?
That's a different one. That's for law.
This one, you just have to walk by the bar, literally the
exactly.
bar, literally a bar. So what is your thoughts in terms of, okay, so we talked about it, like anybody can be a life coach and anybody can kind of put that out there, and there are good ones and there are bad ones, but but what are your thoughts on, there's definitely, from within the professional community there, and like researchers like myself and stuff, there are people who, that like, you hear life coach and you go and you shut down and you're like, this is no. Sure. Most people are going to do this poorly, right? But then I find from like regular people who are not involved in this professionally somehow find life coach to be an easier term to swallow, because it's a lot more. If I say that I'm a life coach, oh well, she's not giving me therapy. Oh well, she's not psychologizing me. I'm okay. I'm normal. I'm totally fine. And she's just helping me through my life. Like, why do you think that is?
Right. Yeah. God forbid you call it psychotherapy, right? Like I'm getting some psychotherapy for my issues.
Right.
Suddenly you're like, stigma. Like, So I mean, I think that's a big part of it.
Stigma,
we've made a lot of progress. I mean, one thing is that, like, I think the term, like the term therapist has become a lot more acceptable for sure. You see that like on like Twitter all the time. You see like my therapist said XYZ, or even memes about it, jokes about it, stuff like that. So like the term is washing out in a good way where there's less like, visceral sort of to it.
Right.
But I think that there's still room to go. I mean, we're not that far into like that whole thing going on. We're not that far into like the acceptance part of it. And so, give it a few more years, and I think it'll continue to build in sort of its reputation and such. I think there's also a problem where, a lot of people unfortunately have had bad therapists too. A lot of people have gone through therapy and are like, they just sat and stared at me, like they didn't say anything. They're like, wow. I think they might've fallen asleep once or twice, and then they made me pay 150.
We've heard a lot of, because people will come here after the like, I don't believe in therapists, so you help me. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. And you should go back to therapy. But I know, I hear that often enough. And I've heard some horror stories, and like, I myself have gone to bad psychiatrists and therapists. So like, I get it, but
unfortunately they exist. It's a field where you'd hope that they don't. And of course, there are some things that are not so cut and dry. It might be more of a personality mismatch or things like that, especially for people who are younger. You go see a 60-year-old therapist, they may not understand what your phone means to you, or what a Twitch or whatever stream means to you, or understand what your job even is, right? And so you have to take the time to try to explain that so that they can try to empathize with you, and then suddenly you're like, you don't feel like you can trust that person, and then there are ones who are just jaded, and some of that is a byproduct of like having to, in certain fields, you have to crank out as many clients as you can to like really kind of make a living. And you can get jaded from it and not care about it as much. But I have always typically worked well with people who have had bad previous experiences with therapy. And I'm interested to see kind of how things progress with online therapy as well. I personally, I don't do any therapy through like the apps like BetterHelp or anything like that, but I do private online therapy through, basically just like this, but in graduate school, I did my dissertation on online therapy and discovered that, one of the major groups of people who gravitate toward that are people who have had bad experiences prior with therapy. Right. Because there's almost like a lower threshold, it's less, even though it's the same amount of time, it feels like less wasted time if it doesn't work out, or there's just sort of like something that makes it feel like you might be able to circumvent some of the BS of normal therapy.
Right.
So
and then there's,
can you hear my dog in the background? She's whining.
Oh, is that a dog? It sounded like a bird to me, like maybe a parakeet or something, but a dog. I'll take it.
I have a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a puppy who just got spayed. So there's probably all sorts of weird sounds coming from out there.
They're just random noises then.
Yeah.
They're a little bit of everything.
Usually like on, if I'm recording a podcast or something, it's like, I'm sure they can't hear it, but holy crap, I can't focus with that going on.
I only hear it very like faintly in the background, and I've learned to tune it out. You're certainly not the first or the last person who's going to have like kids in the background. So it's totally, I
don't think anybody's dying. So we'll just operate under that assumption.
I mean, if somebody is dying, definitely please attend to them before we continue the show. That's quite all right.
We'll see. Priorities.
So what do you think would make psychology just in general more accessible to the masses? So the big one that I hear about is just it's cost inhibitive, and even in countries where there is public health care. So what are your thoughts?
That's hard. I don't really have a lot of opinions that I could share about like kind of the cost side of it. Like it is unfortunate, like I'm expensive, and everybody couldn't see me, and that kind of sucks. I mean, part of our ethical duty is to also provide low cost or free care when we can, so you try to balance it out with that. It would be nice if things were like more covered and subsidized so that people wouldn't bear the burden of that. But as we see in, like, for instance, I hear from a lot of people that the system in the UK is also very difficult to navigate, hard to get appointments, all sorts of things like that. So in terms of a perfect solution for that, I don't know. I do know that it's, even though you're paying, say you see a therapist, you pay them $100-$150 or whatever. That sounds like a whole lot of money, and it is, but they're also not rolling in the dough. Like they're seeing a ton of clients to try to make ends meet. So there's something in the middle that kind of sucks about the whole thing. And a lot of the platforms that have come out that are trying to lower the cost of it, especially these online platforms, there are some there are no shortcuts, to good care. And so
Yeah.
when you have somebody who's, okay, I'm getting paid less, but I'm seeing 59 clients at the same time and texting all of them at once, that's a lot of multitasking and not exactly the same level of care that you might get. Yeah. So, one thing that I need to be careful about how much I talk about this, because I'm developing a product that's not like public yet, but
okay.
So the best clients that I get are the ones that find me through my resources, right? They found my books, or they listened to the podcast, or they found a blog post of mine that popped up when they Googled something, whatever the case may be. And so when they see me, they have a head start. They already know what I'm all about. They already trust me to an extent because I try to be authentic in what I do. So they do get a sense of my personality. Right. And so it's really, that part of it is really, really important. Having an online presence, I think. And a lot of therapists don't. I mean, a lot of therapists don't even have a website. And that, to me, in this day and age, is freaking crazy.
Yeah, that doesn't, I feel like even if you're a person with no professional background other than
you still have a website or something.
Yeah, like I just put my resume on here. It's the website where you search my name, it comes up. That's,
yeah. And certainly somebody that you're trying to kind of like give your stuff over to and trust them to hold it for you well, you want to try to get a sense of them. And that's really hard to do from like a Psychology Today profile, So one thing that I think would really, really serve the world is more therapists and mental health professionals putting out content or having platforms to do so that people can make a more educated decision about who they see. So there's not so much trial and error back and forth. So there's not so many, kind of missed opportunities and things like that, because the personality match matters. And we have a lot of fancy techniques and all this stuff in therapy, all the CBT stuff that I was talking to you about. But when you look at the research, a big chunk of what actually helps somebody change in therapy is whether they think they're going to be able to or not, and whether they believe in the person that's going to be helping them, their expectations for it, right? So you take the relationship and those expectations, and suddenly that's a huge chunk of what might actually cause change. So, if you have a way to actually understand what someone's all about, sort of start that relationship building phase before you even talk to them, that's gonna, you're naturally gonna have a much better chance of kind of hitting a home run on the first try. And much like I was talking about with like kind of our books being unempathetic and not recognizing what it's like to actually struggle with mental health issues, like I think that a lot of times we don't realize that like reaching out to one person is a really huge effort a lot of times. And if there's anything that gets in the way of that, even having to go to voicemail, having to switch psychologists or therapists to somebody else, all of those are things that vastly increase that treatment gap where somebody is going to drop off and not get treatment for what they need. So that's kind of where I see there being a big opportunity is trying to put more out there and have more resources so people can get to know you before working with you directly.
So what is the responsibility there? So if you post a resource, let's say, I can repost your resource, right? I'm not a professional. I can say your resource did a lot, like, oh, I read this, I did this workbook, and actually I did feel less anxious after I did it. You guys should check it out. This is literally what I do, right? So, but then you're putting it out there and potentially saying, here is something that potentially should work for you. Like, where is is there an issue there? Are you talking about
like for somebody like in your position where like what is your responsibility?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the lines in like what is your responsibility, and when you post that, like what makes that okay for you to put that information out there, not knowing. There might be people who use this stuff who you'll never talk to, right? Who will never have the chance to then talk to you and follow up and really digest it properly and all of that. And then, then going down the line, everybody else's responsibility.
I don't think that you have, that much responsibility. I think the responsibility falls on me if I'm the one you're sharing in that case, right? Okay. It's my resource that I put out there. I'm putting my, professional name behind it and, saying whatever I'm claiming in there that's my claim,
Right. Okay.
People are going to talk about things that exist always, and so the responsibility, I think you need to go easy on yourself in cases like that, because the responsibility falls on the person who's creating that content, to be responsible and informative and things like that. And then responsibility also falls on the consumer to make sure that they're kind of trying to vet sources and make sure somebody's not a quack before diving into their product, or at least tempering it with knowledge about other things and stuff like that. just like trying to look at the news and consume that in a more responsible way. So, I mean, it's like, I think it's important not to overstate things as the one who's sort of relaying information, not to say like, hey, this is the miracle cure, you're all going to get better from this. Like, certainly you don't need to be giving, you need to watch out for giving direct medical advice, right? So it's one thing to repost, say you shared my book and you're like, dude, this helped my anxiety so much.
Right.
It's another thing to say, hey, throw away your pills. You don't need them anymore. This book came around. Those are two very, very different things.
Right.
The second would be a bit irresponsible, but I don't think that, like, I think that the bell curve is very skewed. It's like there's so much that is probably just fine because it's, just communication and sharing things that somebody else did. There are some ways that you can do that are exploitative or irresponsible or things like that. And that's my opinion about it, at least. I think that making an effort to try to be mindful of that is awesome and great, but it's not like, I don't think that somebody should be like punished by law or something for, any small transgression in that regard. I think it's something that you should kind of aspire to do, to be like a good, person in this sort of, I don't know what to call it, a field, but like, in this realm of things.
Area.
Yeah. You want to try your best and try to lead people toward things, but as long as you're making it clear that you're not the professional here, then that's what we want to be looking at. When people start crossing that line and giving that direct advice and just not calling it therapy, like some of these life coaches are doing, that's where you can definitely get into that murky territory, or just directly bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes a ton of sense. It's something I think I ask every professional, and the responses have been pretty much the same across the board in every professional that I talk to, because I always ask, like, okay, so what is my responsibility as an advocate because it does become rather heartless of me to just go, oh, you're having a problem? Can you go to Dr. Duffy? Like, as much as that's awesome, and like, maybe I'm directing a client to you, like, that's amazing, but from my end, that's also like, that's not really empathizing enough, and that might not be really helpful enough. If I'm just your librarian, I get, but you know what? There's a lot of use for that too. Being the librarian, being like, here's resources, and
take your scenario that you're imagining with that, like that hypothetical where you're sort of just kind of like, directing people a different way. You are where you are right now, but imagine if you scaled that up and dialed that up to where maybe you have 10 million followers or something like that. Being that empathetic and making sure you drill down into whether this is going to be the exact right resource for a given person, and making sure to consider all the aspects of the situation, that would not be sustainable at that scale.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the reason why I make resources too. That's why I put my books out. That's why I have my podcast. That's why I have my online course, because I get unending emails and DMs and things like that with these direct questions. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be your therapist right now and answer you right here, but I might take this and direct it outward to everybody and give the response that, a lot of people can pick up on and benefit from in a podcast question. Or I might use this as influence for, one of the chapters in my next book, or whatever the case may be, because I can't help everybody,
Right.
Nobody can.
Right.
No matter how much you want to.
No, but I think that's the thing that, like, bears repeating to everybody, including people in crisis, that like this one person that you're contacting might not be the last person who's going to be able to help you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're being passed on or anything. It just means that you need a better resource, and that person hopefully is kind enough to send you to the next step to help you on your way, if they have the ability and time and everything. But your resources are freaking amazing. I'm really stoked that I had the opportunity to I definitely am going to be buying the depression book, because I really enjoyed the anxiety book. It's just a matter of finding time to read it, which I know they're very short. I'll send it to you. Are you sure? Because I mean, I don't mind, but I don't mind. Like you said, they're $2.99.
This is the right month. I've given away like 1,000 books this month, I think. Is what over 1,000 is what we made it up to, and I'm doing a huge giveaway right now where I'll be giving away a bunch more. So
all right, you guys. There's the link. I know I've seen them on your Twitter page, the giveaways. So
dude, there's so much going on. This month, October, is like marks 5 years since starting this brand. So since starting Duff the Psych.
Okay.
For my birthday, which is October 27th. If anyone wants to send me anything, No, but on my birthday, my wife gave me my first like version, the first version of my website, like the Duff the Psych website, as a gift because we were poor at the time, and that's what she could do, and it was a great idea. And so that sort of was like the start point of this brand. And so now it's been 5 years, and 3.5 books and podcasts, all these other things since then. And so I've been celebrating all month. That's why I gave the books away for free. I'm doing this huge sale on my online course, doing a huge giveaway, all this stuff. I'm kind of basically celebrating all month and trying to give as much as I can as a thanks to like how cool it's been.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. I hope you have time for just a few questions. I don't think we have that many, but you guys ask your questions, exclamation, letter Q, and then questions away. I don't know. Sometimes I just I get too deep and then the audience is like, no, that was it.
You covered it.
Yeah, you covered everything. And then sometimes the audience is like, wait, but this thing.
Yeah.
So
that's a good sign when that happens, though.
Yeah, but let's see where we are. Sure. So I know I have one, but if you guys, so my moderator is asking, so I'm gonna say it out loud. If you guys want to find the books and stuff, everything is on. I linked out to Duff's website. So everything is off of there. The podcast, everything can be found there, and resources and everything. So that is the place to start. So go to the website, and then from there, find anything else you need. And again, I'm pretty sure if you type in fuck anxiety or fuck depression to Amazon, they'll definitely pop up. And they're super accessible, and they were such a fast read. I don't have time to read. You guys know that. And it just came in and out. So.
The anxiety book's like 70 pages. It's real short.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
For the website, if you do duffthepsych.com/start here, that's sort of like the page I made for people that haven't encountered me before. So it has like my greatest hit blog posts, podcast episodes, my books, TEDx talks, stuff like that. So you can find all of that there.
I didn't know you did a TEDx.
Yeah, it's basically about what we talked about in here. So it's about the what I consider the cost of overcomplicating language, losing people, not being able to have people get the help that they need because they can't approach it, so it's kind of all about that in the story that we talked about.
Got it. You guys, it's really funny. If you type in fuck anxiety, it is going to, the bot is going to automatically filter you out. So if you're I'm really sorry, but please do let us know that you bought the book. We're very excited. We're very excited to know that you got it. It's just the bot is set there. Yeah.
No.
It's just okay. So the first question is, do you think younger therapists are tending to be drawing away from traditional therapy techniques and just more relaxed? How do you think that's affecting people receiving therapy?
What was it? What kind of therapists?
Just younger therapists. Do you think that younger therapists tend to be drawing away from traditional therapy techniques and are generally more relaxed? How do you think that is affecting people looking to receive therapy?
I think it's hard to say on the whole. My perception is probably, what's interesting is there's this whole line of research called the master therapist model, which is basically if you've been doing therapy for long enough and you're good at it, you tend to converge. Basically even if you take people from CBT, existential psychology, psychodynamic therapy, interpersonal, at the top level, when you've been doing it for long enough, they basically look the same because there are certain factors that just work when you're talking to somebody and empathizing with them and, all that kind of stuff. They're going to have slightly different styles, but a lot of it looks the same, So I think that the training's still the same, essentially. I think the one great thing that the younger generations have that the older don't is, obviously you understand what's going on with, I don't want to say technology necessarily only, but just what's going on in the world right now and the vibe, but also things like intersectionality, and understanding that there's a cross section. Somebody is not just a person with anxiety. If it's a person with anxiety, that's a person of color that matters. If it's a person with anxiety, that's a person of color that lives in an area where they might be discriminated against more than others. And they might also be queer or gender nonconforming. These are all unique, different things, and you can't treat them exactly the same. And so I think that the younger generations are doing a great job of taking, the body of training and research and stuff like that and trying to make it fit nicely with the fact that the world is different now than it was when those things were made, or it may not be different, but we're getting better at recognizing the way the world really is, I should say, and trying to make that work. And there's not necessarily, there are handbooks on that, but for instance, when I was going through my graduate school, the classes on like identity development for,
Mm-hmm.
like Black identity development, queer identity development, whatever, they sucked. It's like it was so cookie cutter. There's these stages, and the bottom line was like, well, everybody's different and stuff like that. And so I think that at least younger generations are hopefully being a lot more realistic with things and meeting people where they are, and that's going to be a really important thing to continue doing.
Cool. Cool.
Hopefully that's not a dodging answer. I think I answered the
No,
question.
I don't think that's dodging. I mean, Tally can tell you because she's right there, so she can tell you. I don't think that's a dodging answer.
Cool.
What could being B asks? Is there any way to remove guesswork out of mental health medications? That is a little bit of a vague question, so let's see how we
Out
can
of mental
answer.
health, what?
Medications. Is there a way to remove the guesswork out of
Yeah,
mental health
that's
medications?
tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good question because a lot of times, unfortunately, it does take some trial and error. Whether
Right.
even if you're taking, say, an SSRI,
Right.
there's so many different medications within that
Right.
class.
Right.
One thing that I always suggest is trying to go to a psychiatrist if you can, rather than seeing your primary care for it, because
Right.
they're going to be much more well equipped, hopefully, to see the nuances and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I think that my answer would be very different if we were doing this 5 or 10 years from now, because we're working on a lot of blood tests, genetic tests, things like that, to look at what you'd be more likely to respond to. They're
Yes.
not great right now.
Yes.
They're not great right now. Some people are using them, like the I forget what they're called, the genetic testing that you do where you
I know
swab and
what
stuff
you're
like that.
talking about because it was suggested to me at one point. They're
Mhm.
like, well, if this medication doesn't work for you, then we're going to have to do genetic testing. And they're
And
like,
and
it'll
there
cost
are
you $2,000, but insurance will cover, I think, 1,000 of it. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not doing that.
some psychiatrists and other providers are getting a little bit more savvy where they'll do the home-based version of the kit, but then
Okay.
upload that into a different, I think it's called Prometheus or something like that. There's like a
Huh.
different type of software that will help you learn more from it than just kind of the base level what you get.
Okay.
And that can be sort of a bridge between like the full-on university study versus the at-home kit.
Okay.
But the short answer is there's not a lot of ways that you can at the very top level make sure you're getting it right on the first try. Genetics matter. Your prior history matters. If you have a parent with a similar issue and they've responded well to something, that's important to know. If you tried something in the past and it's worked or not, that's important to know. And then just keeping the line of communication open, giving things a shot for as long as it takes. A lot of times people will hop on an SSRI and then get off of it in a couple weeks because they don't think it's working. Side effects are one thing. If you're having severe side effects,
Right.
yeah, definitely get off of it, but they take like a month to actually start working in the first place. And a lot of people, they'll go to their primary care and they're like, well, that didn't work. Try this, try that, try this.
Right.
That can suck. So, having a competent provider to the best of your ability to find one, keeping in mind the history, if they're savvy in doing any of these sort of genetic tests, it might help, but it might not, but again, this is a field this is one of the biggest areas of study right now that hopefully we'll be able to get a whole lot better at soon.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I have to ask because you kind of briefly touched upon this. So I'm going to ask the kind of lastest question. If nobody else has any questions, exclamation Q, you guys, so those can pop up. So how do you feel about people? So I was at a conference and they were talking very openly about how your gut bacteria really affects your brain, and there's a huge area of research here, and it's basically like, ditch your meds, let's do the whole holistic thing, eat some yogurt, and your brain's gonna be fine. I think I know what your thoughts are on this, but I'm curious.
I think it's way too early to throw out your meds. I think it's an important line of research. Like, do we have a microbiome? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to affect basically everything? Yeah. Do we know how to manipulate that in a way that's going to fix everything? Like, probably not. I mean, to be honest, the area that I'm more interested in is actually like psychedelic research. So things like psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, ketamine. I mean, I've done a lot of I've done like a couple podcast episodes about ketamine infusions, and those are an amazing tool that I wish those were the first line treatment before SSRIs, because they're not addictive and they make massive change for people in a very unrisky way, and if that solves the problem or really helps with it, that would be great, so that someone doesn't have to get the weight gain and the low libido and all these things that often come along with the other psychiatric medications. John Hopkins University just opened a brand new center for psychedelic research. So they're going to be looking into like psilocybin mushrooms in treatment of like depression in people with Alzheimer's disease, for instance, or people who have really strong treatment resistant depression, where no matter what you do, it's just sticking around. There seems to be a lot of things that we discovered in the past are great resets that, they're not like, there's not a high abuse potential, but they have a strong potential to really put a line in the sand and help you, recover. They got buried up by the war on drugs. And now we're rediscovering that, hey, these are actually like a pretty damn good option.
Right.
And so I think that line of research is massively interesting. And I'm really, really excited to see where that goes.
Cool. All right.
So
I
gave a non-answer to your gut bacteria question
well,
with one that's actually more low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, no, it's low-hanging fruit, but you redirected to a better place, which is, first of all, great psychology on your end. but second of all, no, that's a lot more helpful than if you went on a rant. We're like, holistic doctors suck and whatever else. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
it's going to be an interesting decade. I mean, like within maybe a year or two, we might see FDA approval for MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD. That's like freaking amazing. And we already just had FDA approval of the ketamine nasal spray, which isn't as effective as the infusions, but it's FDA approved now. So that's a big step in the right direction.
That and CBD. I mean, I know CBD is not in the same class, but I'm just saying, like.
Yeah, and CBD does not have. It's a very. I would put it in a totally different arena. That's more. I would say like put it like melatonin. CBD, things of like kind of that milder variety that could certainly help, but they're definitely not going to like put a huge line in the sand, unless you have certain types of inflammation or seizures or things like that. Of course, but. These other compounds are like, they have potential to, like I said, on the podcast, I've done interviews with both people on the client side and doctors about these things. And the one about ketamine is really, really enlightening, because you get people who walk in suicidal, come out not cured, but hopeful, right? They hope that they can get better, which is very different from when they walked in and they were convinced that they realized they're never going to get better, right? Like logically, they came to the conclusion that they're never going to get better. This is the only way out. And for them to say, hey, there's a possibility that things will change, that's like immensely powerful.
I agree.
So,
I agree. That's awesome.
Yeah, that kind of stuff I'm really excited about, and we'll see what things look like. We'll schedule a redo in 10 years.
10 years. Okay, no problem. I'll definitely still be doing exactly this.
Yeah, and your subscriber count will be, super, super high, right? So.
Oh my gosh. You guys, this has been absolutely incredible. Thank you, everybody who participated in chat or otherwise. Do you have any closing remarks before we jump off? Anything that
me or them?
Anything that you want to make sure people know, other than obviously you guys check out the books, check out the website. Please be sure to check out his Twitter for giveaways and stuff like that. Duff is always giving away something, and stuff is free, and it's just like a great resource. There's a lot of posts that are fantastic resources that you've done.
Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate it. No, I don't know if I have anything else that I want to. You plugged plenty of stuff for me, so that's all fine and good and awesome. But I really appreciate what you're doing, and the whole sphere of people that are trying to bring mental health out into the forefront of the conversation, because I think it's important. That really, as much as the stigma is like a buzzword, it's like it does help, and the more it's out there, even in terms of like representation, it's great, and so keeping that out there so that we can help people better is a really important part of the whole deal. So thank you to all you guys.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to be right back. Stick around. I'll talk to you soon.